My feet aren't just swollen, they feel like two overstretched balloons ready to pop against the linoleum of Tony's bistro. 7 months. 7 months of carrying a life I never asked for, created with a man I thought I loved, who turned out to be nothing more than a parasite. I wiped the counter for the 10th time in an hour, the scent of industrial strength bleach and stale grease clinging to my skin like a second layer of clothing. I didn't mind the smell anymore. It was the sound that got to me, the constant, rhythmic clink, clink, clink of the cheap wall clock, counting down the minutes until my shift ended at 2 a.m. $42,500. The number sat in the back of my brain, rendered in sharp, crystalline detail. I could see the exact font of the collection notices Todd had signed my name to. I could see the red ink on the hospital bill from my last ultrasound, the one I'd had to pay for in crumpled fives and singles. Every time I closed my eyes, the ledger of my life scrolled past like a ticker tape. I didn't just remember things, I felt them. I remembered the exact shade of gray the sky had been the day the bank called. I remembered that there were exactly 42 tiles on the floor of the diner's walk-in freezer. "Elena, table 4 wants more water," Tony barked from the pass-through, his voice a jagged saw against my nerves. I grabbed the plastic pitcher, my hand trembling slightly. I shifted my weight, trying to ease the ache in my lower back. The baby kicked, a sharp, insistent jab against my ribs. "I know, little bird, just a few more hours." Table 4 was occupied by two men who looked like they'd been carved out of granite. They didn't look at me. No one ever really looked at the pregnant waitress. I was a fixture, a utility, a vessel. I was invisible, and usually I liked it that way. Invisibility was safe. Invisibility meant Todd couldn't find me. But as I refilled their glasses, my eyes betrayed me. It was the curse of my memory. I noticed the way the man on the left kept his hand near his waistband. I noticed the tiny embroidered crest on his cufflink, a stylized V. I noticed the heavy bulge of a holster beneath his jacket. My heart did a slow, heavy roll in my chest. This wasn't just a diner. At this hour, Tony's was a neutral ground for the people who ran the city's shadows. I kept my head down, focusing on the water level, careful not to spill a drop. Don't look, don't remember, just survive. The bell above the door didn't just chime, it screamed. The cold air of the November night rushed in, bringing with it the smell of rain and cheap cigarettes. I didn't need to look up to know who it was. The heavy, uneven footsteps, the left heel dragging slightly, belonged to only one person: Todd. My stomach turned to ice. I gripped the water pitcher so hard my knuckles turned white. He found me. I'd moved 3 times in 4 months, changed my number, blocked every contact, but Todd was like a bloodhound when he needed a fix. "Elena!" he roared, his voice thick with bourbon and desperation. He didn't care about the men at table 4. He didn't care about Tony's glares. He stomped toward the counter, his eyes bloodshot, his jacket stained with something dark. "I know you got it," he hissed, leaning over the laminate surface. His breath was a weapon. "I know you're skimming from the tips. Give it to me." "I don't have anything, Todd," I whispered, my voice cracking. I tried to step back, but the counter caught me in the small of my back, right where the ache was worst. "The rent is due. The baby needs—" "The baby is a drain," he snapped, reaching out to grab my wrist. His fingers were like iron bands, squeezing right over the yellowing bruise he'd given me 3 days ago when he'd cornered me at the grocery store. "You're holding out on me. I owe people, Elena. Serious people. If I don't get 5 grand by tomorrow, I'm a dead man." 5,000? I knew his debts better than he did. He didn't owe 5,000. He owed 12. He was lying, as always. "I don't have it," I said, more firmly this time. He didn't speak. He just lunged. He reached across the counter and shoved me. It wasn't a punch, but it was enough. My heels caught on the uneven linoleum and I went down. I hit the floor hard, the air leaving my lungs in a sharp whoosh. My hands went instinctively to my stomach, shielding the bump as I skidded against the base of the soda fountain. Pain flared through my hip, hot and blinding. "Get up," Todd yelled, stepping around the counter. "Get up and get the key to the safe." I looked up, tears stinging my eyes. I saw Tony retreating into the kitchen. He wouldn't help. He never did. I saw the men at table 4 watching, their expressions unreadable. And then I saw him. The door opened again. It didn't slam this time. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace that made the entire room go silent. Even Todd stopped mid-stride, his hand raised to strike me again. The man who entered wore an overcoat that cost more I'd make in a decade. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the narrow entryway, but it was his stillness that was terrifying. He didn't look angry, he looked like a storm that hadn't decided where to break yet. His eyes were a blue so pale they were almost white, glacier blue. He walked toward the center of the diner, ignoring the "wait to be seated" sign. Every man in the room stood up, not out of politeness, but out of a primal, ingrained reflex. This was the apex predator. Lorenzo, one of the men from table 4 murmured, bowing his head. Valenti, Lorenzo Valenti, the head of the family, the man who owned the ports, the warehouses, and half the police force. Todd, in his drunken stupidity, didn't back down. "Hey, this is family business. Keep walking, pal." Lorenzo didn't keep walking. He stopped 3 feet from Todd. He didn't look at Todd yet. He looked at me. He looked at my hands, still protectively cradling my stomach. He looked at my swollen ankles. And then his gaze drifted to my wrist, where Todd's fingers had left fresh red welts over the old purple shadows he'd given me 3 days ago when he'd cornered me at the grocery store. "Who did this to you?" Lorenzo asked. His voice was calm. Too calm. It was the sound of a blade being drawn across silk. I tripped," I lied. It was a reflex, an apology for existing. "It's fine, I'm fine." Lorenzo's gaze shifted to Todd. It was like watching a gargoyle come to life. He didn't move fast, but before Todd could react, Lorenzo's hand shot out. He caught Todd by the throat, his thumb pressing into the carotid artery. Todd made a sound like a dying bird. He tried to swing, but Lorenzo didn't even flinch. He just tightened his grip, lifting Todd until the tips of his work boots barely touched the floor. "I asked the lady a question," Lorenzo said, his voice never rising above a conversational tone. "She lied to protect you. I find that distasteful." "Let him go," I cried out, struggling to find my footing. I used the counter to haul myself up, my breath coming in ragged gasps. "Please, he's leaving." Lorenzo looked at me again. This time, there was something else in his eyes, a flicker of something that wasn't cold. It was recognition. "You're the one who remembers," he said. I froze. "What?" "Table 6, he continued, still holding Todd like a piece of trash. "3 weeks ago, you served a man named Rossi. He left a napkin on the table. You didn't throw it away immediately. You looked at it for exactly 4 seconds, then you tucked it into your apron." My heart hammered against my ribs. I remembered. The napkin had a series of coordinates and a date. I'd kept it because the numbers formed a pattern, a Fibonacci sequence used in offshore banking codes. I hadn't known why I kept it. I couldn't let the pattern go. "How do you know that?" I whispered. "I've been watching you, Elena Vance," Lorenzo said. He finally let go of Todd, who collapsed into a heap, gasping for air. Lorenzo didn't even look down at him. He stepped over Todd as if he were a puddle of spilled milk. He reached out. I flinched, expecting a blow, but his hand was gentle. He took my bruised wrist in his palm. His skin was warm, his touch incredibly light, but I could feel the coiled power in him. He smelled of expensive cedar wood and the faint, sharp scent of gunpowder. "You have a gift," he said, his thumb brushing over the welt. "And you have a burden, both of which are being wasted in this place." "I have a debt," I corrected him, trying to pull my hand away. He didn't let go. $42,000. I can't leave." Lorenzo leaned in, his face inches from mine. I could see the fine lines around his eyes, the absolute certainty in his gaze. "You don't have a debt anymore," he said. "Todd here works for Stefano Rossi, or he did until tonight. Rossi uses men like him to find cracks in my city. You were his crack, Elena. He was going to use you to get to me. My blood ran cold. Todd? A spy? Todd couldn't even remember to pay the electric bill. But then I remembered the men he'd been hanging out with, the black SUVs, the $12,000 he actually owed, not to a bookie but to a handler. I didn't know. I breathed. I know you didn't, Lorenzo said. He released my wrist and turned to his men. Take the trash to the cellar. I want to know everything Rossi told him. No, Lorenzo, please! Todd shrieked as the granite-faced men dragged him toward the back exit. Lorenzo ignored the screams. He took off his overcoat, a heavy midnight blue cashmere, and draped it over my shoulders. It was warm, smelling of him, and it felt like wearing a suit of armor. You're coming with me, he said. It wasn't a question. I can't, even as I leaned into the warmth of the coat. I have a shift. I have nowhere to go. You're going to a house where the doors lock from the inside and the fridge is full. Lorenzo walked toward the door, expecting me to follow. I looked back at the diner. The grease, the bleach, the $42,500 that had been my prison. I looked at Tony, who was hiding in the kitchen. I looked at the spot on the floor where I'd fallen. If I stayed here, Rossi's men would come for me. If Todd had failed, they would send someone worse. I was 7 months pregnant, broke and hunted. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why help me? Lorenzo stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. I had a sister once. She was like you. She thought she was a burden. She thought the only way to pay a debt was with her life. He paused, his shoulders tensing. I wasn't powerful enough then to tell her she was wrong. I am now. He pushed the door open. The wind howled, and for a second the street lights flickered and died. The long night was beginning. I could feel it in the air, a tension that suggested the city was about to bleed. Elena, he said, finally turning back. He held out his hand. If you stay, you die. If you come with me, you'll never have to count pennies again. But you will have to remember everything. I looked at his hand. It was the hand of a killer, but it was the only hand offered to me in a world that wanted to swallow me whole. I thought of the baby. I thought of the bruise on my wrist. I reached out and took his hand. What happens now? I asked. Lorenzo's grip tightened, not to hurt, but to anchor. His eyes went dark, reflecting the shadows of the street. Now, he said, we go to war, and you're going to tell me exactly how to win it. I stepped out into the cold, the heavy cashmere coat swaying around my legs. As the door to the diner clicked shut behind me, I knew I would never step inside it again. I was no longer the invisible girl. I was something else entirely. And as the first drops of icy rain hit the pavement, I realized I hadn't just accepted his protection, I had handed him the keys to the city. I followed him to the waiting car, my heart hammering a rhythm I finally recognized. It wasn't fear, not anymore. It was the sound of a dead being settled in blood. The elevator didn't just move, it glided. It was a silent, pressurized ascent into a world I'd only seen in the glossy magazines left behind at the bistro. When the doors slid open, they revealed a penthouse that felt less like a home and more like a fortress made of glass and midnight. The air here didn't smell like grease or rain. It smelled of expensive leather, cold marble, and a faint, lingering hint of ozone from the high-end filtration system. "This is too much," I whispered, the words catching in my throat as I looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The lights below looked like spilled jewels, but from this height, the people looked like ants. "It is what is necessary," Lorenzo said. He hadn't taken his eyes off me since we left the diner. He stepped out, his hand guiding me by the small of my back. A touch so light I could barely feel it, yet it felt like a brand. A man was waiting for us in the foyer. He was younger than Lorenzo, with a jagged scar running through his left eyebrow and shoulders that looked like they could hold up the ceiling. Dante, Lorenzo said, his voice regaining that terrifying, flat tone. This is Elena. She is our guest. She is to have everything she requires: medical, nutritional, comfort. If she asks for the moon, find a way to bring it down. Dante's eyes flicked to me, then to my stomach, then back to Lorenzo. He didn't look happy, but he bowed his head. The security teams are doubled. The floor is locked down. Rossi's men haven't been spotted within 5 blocks. Good. Get her settled in the East Wing. Wait, I said, turning to Lorenzo. The adrenaline from the diner was finally fading, replaced by a cold, sharp reality. I'm not a guest, Lorenzo. I know how this works. You didn't save me because you're a Boy Scout. You saved me because of what I remember. Lorenzo stepped closer, his presence a physical weight. He reached out, his fingers hovering just an inch from my cheek before he pulled back, as if remembering a boundary. You are here because you are carrying a life that deserves better than a gutter in the South Side, he said softly. And yes, you are here because you are the only one who can see the map Rossi is drawing. But don't mistake my interest for a transaction, Elena. You aren't a tool. Then what am I? He looked at me for a long beat, his glacier blue eyes searching mine. You are the first thing in a long time that makes this city feel worth holding. He turned and walked toward a set of double doors, leaving me with Dante. The East Wing was a masterclass in luxury, a bed the size of a small island, sheets with a thread count that felt like liquid silk, and a bathroom larger than my entire apartment. But as I sat on the edge of the bed, my feet finally beginning to throb in earnest, I didn't feel like a queen. I felt like a bird in a very expensive cage. $42,500. I thought about the debt. I thought about the bills. Lorenzo had said the debt was gone, but in this world, nothing was ever truly free. Every meal I ate here, every hour of safety, was another entry on a new ledger. I walked to the window and looked out. Somewhere down there, Todd was in a cellar screaming. Somewhere else, a man named Rossi was planning a war. And here I was, caught in the middle, waiting for the sun to rise on a world I no longer recognized. I couldn't sleep. The bed was too soft, the silence too loud. I found myself wandering the halls at 3 a.m., my hand resting on the baby's constant, restless movement. The penthouse was dimly lit, the shadows long and deep. I found myself drawn toward the center of the apartment, Lorenzo's office. The door was ajar. I peered inside. Lorenzo was sitting at a desk made of dark, polished wood, surrounded by monitors and stacks of documents. He had his sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms corded with muscle and ink. He looked tired, not the tired of a man who needed sleep, but the tired of a man who had been carrying the world for too long. On the floor near his desk was a large plastic bin filled with shredded paper. "You're supposed to be resting," he said without looking up. "I don't do well with supposed to," I replied, stepping into the room. I looked at the bin. My brain began to itch, the familiar, frantic sensation of my memory trying to solve a puzzle it hadn't been invited to. "What is that?" I asked. "Rossi's accounting," Lorenzo said, rubbing his eyes. "My men intercepted a courier. He managed to get the ledger into a micro-shredder before they took him. It's useless. My best analysts say it would take a year to piece together." I walked over to the bin. I knelt down, slowly, painfully, and ran my hand through the strips of paper. I didn't see trash. I saw fragments of a language I'd been speaking my whole life. A piece of a 7, the curve of an S, the specific grain of a watermark. I remember that napkin from the diner. 41.8781 degrees N, 87.6298 degrees W, October 14th, sequence 112358. "I can do it," I said. Lorenzo looked at me then, his brow furrowing. "Elena, there are thousands of pieces." I don't need to glue them back together, I said, my voice growing stronger. I just need to see them. My brain doesn't just store things, it categorizes them. It's like a giant spreadsheet. If I see the fragments, I can reconstruct the patterns. I grabbed a handful of paper and spread it on the floor. I said, "Give me a table, and coffee, decaf." For the next 4 hours, the world disappeared. Lorenzo moved a small side table over to me and sat on the floor watching in silence. I didn't talk, I just moved. I picked up a strip, looked at it for a second, and placed it in a specific spot on the floor, then another, then another. 0492. That's a date format used by the Port Authority. The ink is slightly faded, meaning it was printed on an older thermal printer. Table 3 at the bistro. The guy with the red tie always complained about the thermal receipts at the shipyard. The connections began to fire like neurons. "It's not a ledger," I said, my voice a whisper. I didn't look up. "It's a schedule. Rossi isn't just moving drugs, he's moving people, but not in, out." "Explain," Lorenzo said. "Look at the numbers." I pointed to a row of fragments I'd aligned. "These aren't weights, they're ID numbers, specifically employee IDs for your own logistics firm, Valenti Global." Lorenzo leaned in, his face hardening. "He's infiltrating my staff?" "No," I said, looking at him now. "He's replacing them. He's been systematically buying out your manager's debts. Todd wasn't the only one. He has at least 6 of your key logistics coordinators in his pocket. They aren't spying for him, Lorenzo. They're clearing the way. He's planning to move an entire shipment through the port of Chicago during the Thanksgiving blackout when the power grid goes down for maintenance." Lorenzo stood up, his jaw tight. He looked at the floor, at the puzzle I'd solved in a single night. "He's going for the heart of the empire," Lorenzo murmured. "If he controls the port during the blackout, he controls everything. He can bring in whatever he wants, and I'll be blind." He looked at me, and for the first time, there was something like awe in his expression. "You just saved my life, Elena, and the lives of everyone who works for me." "I just saw the numbers," I said, trying to shrug it off, but my heart was racing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt like a weapon. The sun was beginning to bleed over the horizon when I finally collapsed onto the sofa in the office. Every muscle in my body felt like it was made of lead. "You're done," Lorenzo said. His voice was different now, softer, almost melodic. He didn't call for Dante. He didn't call for a maid. He walked over to the sofa and knelt by my feet. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to pull my legs back. "Stay," he commanded, but it wasn't a threat. He reached out and unbuckled my cheap, worn-out waitress shoes. I was embarrassed. My socks were thin, my feet were swollen and ugly, but he didn't seem to notice. He set the shoes aside and took my right foot in his hands. His touch was electric. He began to rub the arches of my feet with a rhythmic, firm pressure that made me gasp. "You've been standing for 10 years, he said quietly. "You can let someone else carry the weight for a few minutes." "I don't know how to do that," I whispered. He didn't answer. He just kept working, his large hands maneuvering with a gentleness that didn't belong to a man who killed people for a living. "Tell me about your sister," the words slipping out before I could stop them. Lorenzo's hands stilled for a fraction of a second, then resumed their movement. "Her name was Sophia. She was 8 years younger. She was sunlight. She didn't belong in this world. My father was a hard man, and he left us with debts that shouldn't have been ours. I was 20, trying to build something out of the wreckage. I thought I was protecting her by keeping her in the dark." He looked up at me, his eyes clouded with a decades-old pain. "A collector came when I wasn't home. He didn't want money, he wanted to send a message. Sophia, she couldn't live with what happened. She took herself away from me because she thought she was a stain on my name. She thought she was a burden I'd be better off without. Lorenzo, he swore then, he said quietly, that I would never let another woman believe her existence was a debt she couldn't pay, that I would build a world where protection wasn't a cage, but a foundation. He moved his hand to my stomach. He didn't ask. He just placed his palm against the fabric of my shirt. The baby kicked. Hard. Lorenzo's eyes widened. A small, genuine smile touched his lips, the first one I'd seen. It transformed his face, taking away the terrifying stillness and replacing it with something human, something beautiful. "She's strong," he said. "How do you know it's a she?" "A feeling," he murmured. He leaned forward, his face inching closer to mine. I should have pulled away. I should have remembered that he was a monster. But all I could feel was the warmth of him, the way he looked at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. When his lips met mine, it wasn't a mafia boss claiming a prize. It was a man seeking shelter. It was soft, tasting of coffee and the coming dawn. It was a promise. He pulled back just an inch, his forehead resting against mine. "I don't deserve this," he whispered. "I am a man of blood, Elena." "We all have stains, Lorenzo," I said, my hand moving to the back of his neck, my fingers tangling in his dark hair. "Some of us just hide them better." I wanted him to kiss me again. I wanted to forget the numbers, the debt, and the war. But then the world broke. A sound like a thunderclap echoed through the penthouse. The floor shook. The massive glass windows in the living room didn't shatter, they were reinforced, but they groaned under the force of a nearby explosion. Lorenzo was on his feet in a heartbeat, his gun in his hand before I could even blink. "Dante!" he roared. The intercom on his desk crackled to life. "Boss, it's an RPG. They hit the transformer in the basement. Power is out. Backup generators are being bypassed. They're inside the building." "How?" Lorenzo hissed, grabbing me by the arm and pulling me toward the secret door behind his bookshelf. It was a panic room, filled with monitors and weapons. "Do not come out until I say my name. Not Dante's. Mine. Do you understand?" "Lorenzo, don't go out there," I pleaded, clutching his coat. He looked at me, his face back to the glacier-cold mask. "They came into my home, Elena. They came for you." He kissed me hard and fast, and then he was gone. The heavy steel door hissed shut, locking with a series of electronic clicks. I was alone in the dark. I turned to the monitors. They were flickering, running on a separate battery backup. I saw the hallway. I saw 3 men in tactical gear moving through the foyer. They weren't just thugs, they were professionals. And then I saw the leader. He wasn't wearing a mask. He walked into the living room, a cigarette dangling from his lip. Todd. But it wasn't the drunken, pathetic Todd from the diner. He was clean-shaven, wearing a tactical vest, and carrying a submachine gun like he'd been born with it. He wasn't a gambler, a cold dread pooling in my stomach. He was the point man. The whole relationship, the debt, the abuse, it was all a setup to get close to the Valenti operations. I was the Trojan horse. "Elena," Todd's voice boomed through the speakers in the panic room. He knew I was listening. "Come on out, baby. Rossi just wants to talk. You give us the codes you cracked tonight, and maybe I'll let the Don live. Maybe I'll even take you back." I watched the screen. Todd was approaching the bookshelf. He knew where the door was. He had the override key. My heart was hammering so loud it was a physical pain. I looked around the room. I wasn't a fighter. I was a pregnant waitress with a good memory. But I remembered what Lorenzo had told me. I would build a world where protection wasn't a cage. I looked at the gun safe on the wall. Lorenzo had shown it to me earlier, a casual mention of safety. Code 0814, Sophia's birthday. I punched in the numbers. The safe clicked open. Inside was a compact Beretta. It was light, designed for a smaller hand. I'd never fired a gun in my life, but I'd seen Lorenzo do it. I remembered the stance, the grip, the way he breathed. I took the gun. I checked the magazine. Exactly 15 rounds. The steel door groaned. Todd was inputting the override. 3 seconds until the lock disengages. I didn't hide in the corner. I didn't scream. I stood in the center of the room, feet apart, arms extended. I felt the baby kick, a sharp, fierce reminder of what I was protecting. The door hissed open. Todd stepped into the room, a smug grin on his face. He expected to find a sobbing girl on her knees. Instead, he found the barrel of a Beretta pointed at his heart. "Whoa, Elena," he said, stopping mid-step. He raised his hands, his gun hanging from a sling. "Easy there. You don't know how to use that." "I remember every word Lorenzo told me about this gun, Todd," I said, my voice steady. It was the voice of the woman who had survived 10 years on the South Side. I remembered that the safety is off. I remembered that the trigger pull is 3 pounds. And I remember that you're a lying son of a bitch who tried to kill my daughter. "Daughter?" Todd laughed, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Come on, Elena, you're a waitress. Put the gun down and let's go. Rossi is waiting." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Todd's expression darkened. He moved his hand toward his weapon. "Don't be a hero, Elena. You're a liability. You're a burden. Always have been." Liability. Burden. The words hit me, but they didn't hurt. They were just data. Incorrect data. "I'm the anchor," I said. I didn't wait for him to draw. I pulled the trigger. The sound was deafening in the small room. The recoil jerked my arms up, but I held on. The bullet caught Todd in the shoulder, spinning him around. He screamed, his gun clattering to the floor. I didn't stop. I walked forward, the gun still level. "Get out," I said. "You bitch," Todd spat, clutching his shoulder. Blood was leaking through his fingers. I fired again. This time the bullet hit the wall an inch from his head. "The next one goes between your eyes, Todd. I don't miss. I remember exactly where your brain is." He looked at me, really looked at me, and saw that the woman he'd been abusing for a year was gone. In her place was something forged in the fires of the Valenti Empire. He scrambled backward, out of the panic room and into the office. Suddenly, a shadow fell over the doorway. Lorenzo appeared, his suit jacket torn, his face splattered with blood. He looked like a god of war. He saw Todd on the floor, then he saw me standing in the panic room, the gun still smoking in my hand. He didn't look surprised, he looked proud. He stepped on Todd's hand, crushing the bone under his heel. Todd screamed. "You missed," Lorenzo said to me, his voice low and dangerous. "I didn't miss," I said, lowering the weapon as the adrenaline finally began to ebb. "I chose not to kill him yet. I wanted you to see him like this." Lorenzo looked at Todd with absolute contempt. He didn't waste a bullet. He just nodded to Dante, who had appeared behind him. "Take him to the harbor. Make sure he stays awake for the whole trip." Dante dragged Todd away, his screams fading into the depths of the penthouse. Lorenzo walked into the panic room. He didn't take the gun from me. He just wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into his chest. I buried my face in his neck, the scent of cedar and gunpowder finally feeling like home. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice shaking. "No," I said. "The baby is fine. We're fine." He pulled back, his hands cupping my face. "They know where you are now. The penthouse isn't safe. Rossi will send everyone he has." I looked at the screens. The city was dark. The long night had truly begun. "Then we don't hide anymore," I said. I looked at the table where the shredded ledger still sat. "I know where his drop points are. I know how he's moving the money. We don't wait for him to strike, Lorenzo. We go after him tonight." Lorenzo looked at me, and I saw the shift in him. He wasn't just my protector anymore. He was my partner. "The city will burn," he warned. "Let it," I said. I'm done taking up as little space as possible. It's time they realized who they're dealing with. Lorenzo reached out and took the gun from my hand, his fingers lingering on mine. "Then let's go," he said. "No one sleeps after sunset." I took his hand, and together we walked out into the dark. The war room in the penthouse smelled of cold coffee and ozone. Outside, the sun was beginning its slow descent, bleeding orange and violet over the Chicago skyline. It was the last sunset the city would see for a long time. "The blackout hits at 1800, Lorenzo said, his finger tracing the blueprint of the Port of Chicago. "Rossi's men will use the 3-minute window between the grid failure and the backup generator kick-in to move the shipment through Warehouse 12. If we don't stop them there, the shipment disappears into the interstate system, and Rossi wins." "Warehouse 12 is a trap," I said, leaning over the table. My lower back screamed in protest, but I ignored it. I could see the layout in my head, rendered in perfect 3-dimensional detail. "You're looking at the current blueprints, but I remember the property tax assessments from 5 years ago, the ones Todd made me file when he was still trying to look like a legitimate developer." Lorenzo looked at me, his eyes sharp. "What did you see?" "There's a sub-basement level that was decommissioned in the 70s due to flooding. It doesn't show up on modern digital maps, but it connects directly to the pier. Rossi isn't going through the main doors, he's going under them. The coordinates I saw on the napkin, they weren't for the warehouse, they were for the ventilation shaft of the old pump room, 41.8781 degrees north and 87.6298 degrees west." Dante let out a low whistle. "He's bypassing our entire perimeter." "Not if we're already waiting in the basement," I countered. Lorenzo turned to me, his jaw tight. "We aren't doing anything, Elena. You're staying here. Dante is leaving 6 men. The panic room is reinforced." "No," I said, my voice steady, brooking no argument. "You're walking into a labyrinth, Lorenzo. The pump room has a pressure-sensitive alarm system that was never removed. If you step on the wrong plate, the whole floor floods with salt water in 90 seconds. I'm the only one who remembers the tile patterns. I'm the only one who knows which path is safe." "Elena, you are 7 months pregnant," he hissed, stepping into my space. His protective instinct was a physical heat, radiating off him in waves. "I will not put you in the line of fire." I reached out, placing my hand over his heart. "You told me you wanted to build a world where protection wasn't a cage. This is me stepping out of the cage, Lorenzo. I'm not a liability. I'm the navigator. If you go in there without me, you're a dead man, and then I'm just a widow waiting for executioner." He looked down at my hand, then up at my eyes. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the computers. "If a single hair on your head is touched," he whispered, his voice thick with a terrifying promise, "I will burn this city until there is nothing left but ash." "Then make sure it isn't," I replied. He leaned down, pressing his forehead to mine. "I love you, Elena Vance. I didn't think I had room for anything but blood in this life, but you are the anchor. I love you too, Lorenzo. Now let's go finish this." The darkness didn't fall, it crashed. At exactly 1800, the city of Chicago vanished. The streetlights, the skyscrapers, the distant hum of the L train, all of it blinked out of existence. The long night had begun. We moved through the decommissioned pump room in total silence, the only light coming from the dim green glow of night vision goggles. I walked directly behind Lorenzo, my hand on his shoulder. My memory was an HUD, projecting the safe tiles onto the floor in front of me. Left, 3. Skip 2. Right, 1. We reached the sub-basement of Warehouse 12, just as the sound of heavy machinery echoed through the concrete cavern. Rossi's men were there, silhouetted by flickering industrial flashlights. They were moving crates, large, heavy crates marked with the Valenti Global logo. "Wait," I whispered into Lorenzo's ear. I saw him. Stefano, the butcher, Rossi. He was standing on a raised catwalk, his face illuminated by the cherry of a cigar. Beside him, looking pale and battered, but still upright, was Todd. "You're sure the Dawn is at the main entrance?" Rossi asked, his voice echoing. "He's there," Todd rasped, his shoulder heavily bandaged from where I'd shot him. "He fell for the Warehouse 12 feint. He'll be banging on the front doors while we're halfway to Indiana." "Good," Rossi said. "Once the shipment is clear, kill the girl's ex. He's outlived his usefulness." Todd's face went white. He opened his mouth to plead, but the sound was drowned out by the sudden, deafening roar of a flashbang. The basement exploded into white light. "Valenti!" Rossi screamed, diving for cover as Lorenzo's men opened fire. The world turned into a chaotic blur of strobe-like muzzle flashes and the metallic tang of bullets hitting shipping containers. Lorenzo shoved me behind a heavy concrete pillar. "Stay down," he barked, before spinning around the corner, his Beretta barking with lethal precision. I didn't stay down. I couldn't. I saw Todd scrambling toward a side exit, the very one that led to the pressure-sensitive floor. He didn't know the pattern. He was going to trigger the flood, and Lorenzo was right in the path of the intake valves. "Todd, stop!" I yelled, stepping out from behind the pillar. Todd froze, his eyes widening as he saw me. A manic, desperate grin spread across his face. "Elena, you're here. Perfect. If I bring you to Rossi, he won't kill me." He lunged for me, but he was slow. I didn't have a gun this time. Lorenzo had taken it for safety, but I had something better. I had the environment. I grabbed a heavy steel wrench from a nearby workbench and threw it, not at Todd, but at the emergency release lever for the overhead steam pipes I'd memorized from the building's 1974 inspection report. The lever snapped. A wall of scalding white steam erupted between me and Todd, hissing like 1,000 vipers. Todd screamed, stumbling back, straight onto the trigger tile. A mechanical groan shook the floor. "Lorenzo, the floor!" I screamed. Lorenzo reacted with the instincts of a man who had survived 1,000 betrayals. He lunged forward, grabbing a hanging chain and swinging himself onto a stack of crates just as the floor plates hissed open. Cold, dark river water surged into the room with the force of an ocean. Todd didn't have a chain. He didn't have a pattern. He was swept off his feet, his screams bubbling away as he was sucked into the drainage grates. He was gone in seconds, a parasite finally washed away by the city he'd tried to infect. But Rossi was still on the catwalk. He aimed his rifle at Lorenzo, who was exposed on top of the crates. "Die, you arrogant prick," Rossi yelled. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. I grabbed a flare gun from the emergency kit on the wall. I remembered exactly where it was because I'd seen the red box in the shadows 10 minutes ago. I aimed and fired. The flare didn't hit Rossi. It hit the open crate of highly flammable magnesium shavings he was standing directly above, a shipment I'd identified from the manifest fragments back at the penthouse. The crate erupted into a blinding, white-hot sun. Rossi was thrown back by the force of the ignition, his clothes catching fire. He tumbled over the railing of the catwalk and fell into the surging water below. He didn't come back up. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the hiss of steam and the rushing water. Lorenzo dropped down from the crates, his boots splashing in the receding flood. He ran to me, his hands shaking as he pulled me into his arms. "You fired a flare," he breathed, his face buried in my hair. "You blew up a warehouse." "I remembered the magnesium," I said, my voice trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. "I remembered the flashpoint." He pulled back, looking at me with a mixture of terror and absolute devotion. "I am never letting you out of my sight again, not for a single second." By dawn, the power was back on. The city woke up to find that the Rossi family had been systematically dismantled in a single night. The butcher was gone, and the Valenti empire was more secure than it had ever been. We were back in the penthouse. I was sitting on the sofa, a warm blanket around my shoulders, while a private doctor checked the baby's heartbeat. "Perfectly healthy," the doctor said, smiling at me. "A bit of a scare, but she's a fighter." When the doctor left, Lorenzo walked over. He didn't say anything at first. He just placed a thick manila envelope on my lap. I opened it. Inside was the deed to a stunning brownstone in Lincoln Park, a trust fund established in the name of Sofia Elena Valenti, and a letter from the bank. My debt, the full $42,500, had been paid in full. There was even a receipt for my student loans. "The debt is paid," Lorenzo said softly. "The house is in your name. Elena, you are a free woman. You can walk out that door right now, and you will never have to see a man like me again." I looked at the papers, then up at him. He was standing by the window, his silhouette dark against the rising sun. He looked lonely. He looked like a man who expected me to run. I picked up the deed and the trust fund. I looked at them for 4 seconds, long enough to memorize every word. Then I tore them in half. Lorenzo froze. "Elena, what are you doing?" "I don't want a house in Lincoln Park," I said, standing up and walking toward him. My feet still ached, but for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. "I don't want to be free from you, Lorenzo. I want to be with you." "I am a monster, Elena," he whispered. "You saw what I did tonight." "I saw what we did tonight," I corrected him. I took his hand and placed it on my stomach. "I'm not the girl from the diner anymore. I'm the woman who cracked the Rossi codes. I'm the woman who saved your life. I don't want your charity, Lorenzo. I want a seat at the table." I looked him dead in the eye. "I want to run the finances, the legitimate side. No more shredded ledgers, no more leaks. I'll make this empire so clean, the IRS will want to give you an award." Lorenzo's breath hitched. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw the shift. He wasn't looking at a waitress, he was looking at his queen. "On one condition," he said, his voice husky. "What?" "You never serve another cup of coffee as long as you live." I laughed, a genuine, light-filled sound. "Deal." He pulled me into a kiss that tasted of the future. It wasn't a rescue anymore. It was a partnership. The boardroom of Valenti Global was silent, the high-back leather chairs occupied by men who once terrified me. Now they didn't look at me with lust or pity. They looked at me with respect. I sat at the head of the table, a nursing pillow tucked into my chair. "The fourth quarter projections for the port logistics are up 12%, I said, my voice echoing through the room. I didn't need notes. I had the entire spreadsheet burned into my mind. By shifting the overseas accounts to the new holding firm in Zurich, we've effectively neutralized the tax liability from the merger." The baby in my arms, little Sophia, let out a soft coo. She was 6 months old, with her father's glacier blue eyes and a grip that suggested she'd be running the city by the time she was 10. Lorenzo stood behind me, his hand resting on my shoulder. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His presence was the shadow that allowed me to shine. "Any questions?" I asked, scanning the room. The men shook their heads. They knew better than to question the woman who had memorized their bank account numbers before breakfast. The meeting adjourned, and the room cleared. Lorenzo stayed behind, leaning down to kiss the top of Sophia's head before kissing my temple. "You're terrifying," he murmured. "Dante is convinced you're actually an advanced AI." "I just pay attention," I said, shifting Sophia to my other arm. We walked to the window together, looking out over our city. The sun was setting again, but this time the lights were staying on. 6 months ago, I had been invisible, drowning in a debt I didn't deserve. I had been a parasite host to a man who saw me as a burden. Now, I was the anchor of an empire. Lorenzo wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling me close. I felt the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart against my back. The world outside would always be dangerous. There would always be new Rossis, new deaths, and new nights of fire. But as I looked at our reflection in the glass, the dawn, the queen, and the air, I knew that no matter how dark the night got, we would never be lost in it. I'd memorized the way home.